everybody. I am so honored to have a wonderful guest, a blogger, an international well-known author, best-selling author, I should say. As we were just talking pre-scenes, like behind the video here, I told Leanne she was one of the bloggers that I found several years ago while I was going through my own health crisis and trying to figure out why my body was reacting differently than all the guys that I knew. And so we're going to really dig deep into that because like I just shared with you, I think all of us that are really talking about keto now, that have been talking about keto for many years, I should say that actually, because everyone's talking about keto now.
Yeah,
but there weren't a whole lot of us talking about keto 4, 5, 6 years ago. People thought it was Atkins, but we all kind of had our own health healing crisis or issue that brought us to it. So can you share a little bit about your healing story, and then we're going to dig into all the nitty gritty about females and why we're a little bit different on our keto journey.
So different. Thanks so much for having me, Lisa. This is such a blast. So I studied holistic nutrition back in 2007, and I learned that hormonal birth control wasn't so good for women. So I decided the first step I can take as a woman that now has this information is go off of hormonal birth control. Right. So I did that, and that kind of started the whole thing with my interest in hormones and health and how hormones impact our ability to really show up in the world as women. And so after 6 months of not getting a period after removing the hormonal birth control, I went to my doctor and I said, yo, doctor, what's up? I should have a period, right? And they're like, yeah, sometimes it just takes longer. Come back in 6 months. So another 6 months passed. We're now at a year. I still don't have my period. I go back to the doctor and he's like, well, do you want to have babies? And I'm like, no. And he's like, okay, well, what's the big deal then? So I was like, in my 20s, and does it really matter if I have a period? Like, I understand that, if I get a period, then that probably means I have enough estrogen, which means my bones are pretty healthy. And it probably means I have enough progesterone because I'm ovulating. And now a period doesn't mean that you're ovulating, but we'll get to that later. But as a 20-something, not having a period, I thought it was a pretty good thing. So a couple of years passed. I met my now husband, and he was kind of concerned about it. And so he recommended that I go to a doctor. I was about at the 4-year mark by then. I chatted with a doctor. She recommended me to another specialist, and that specialist recommended me to a specialist. We were driving all over. We're Canadian, so Alberta and BC, trying to find a specialist to help me get my period back. And the only recommendation that I received was, do you want to get pregnant? Okay, well, it's not a big deal. If you don't want to get pregnant, just live with it. Or we can put you on hormone replacement therapy. And the doctor that recommended that was really cute, and he was very good looking and had a very nice smile. And I was like, sure. Without doing my research, I just said, sign me up. I want to try this. And I went on hormone replacement therapy, not bioidentical, just hormone replacement therapy. And I got a period, but it was exactly the same period that I got when I was on hormonal birth control. It was the same stuff. It was just, packaged differently. And so I got a period, no symptoms, no nothing, other than I started gaining weight very quickly. I was about to get married. We had to keep letting out the dress. It was really stressful. I was training for a triathlon. I was getting married. There were a lot of things happening. I had started up my business, and I was just so frustrated that I was doing everything right and nothing was working. And I'm sure so many of us have been in that space of I'm following step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What's the big deal, body? Let's get with it. Mm-hmm. And that's when I found a low carb protocol, right when I was working with my trainer, and she was like, you need to be gaining muscle. And I'm like, I can't, this isn't possible. She asked me, how long's it been since your last period? And I was like, 7 years. And my naturopathic doctor recommended a low carb diet. I found keto. That same very day, one of my friends had posted a picture of a bunch of disgusting meat on a plate with a Diet Coke and cheese, and used hashtag keto. And I was like, what is this thing she's doing? And that kind of opened me up to the keto thing. And I have a blistered relationship, or had a blistered relationship with food. I struggled with a couple of eating disorders throughout my life. And so when a woman who has struggled with eating disorders is trying to find food freedom and all of this, and just feed her body the way she needs to, finds an eating style, the ketogenic diet, that promises a lot of weight loss very quickly, and then she loses said weight, it becomes this vicious cycle, for me at least, where I cared a lot more about the weight than I did about the hormones, which I kind of came into keto with, of like, let's balance these hormones. And so after 6 months of eating a very strict keto protocol and just about ruining my body for good, I was so sick after those 6 months. But my brain felt so lit up and my anxiety was gone. I wasn't on ADHD medication anymore. And so I came at this crossroads of, again, like, oh, I'm doing everything right and my brain feels good, but my body is clearly telling me I'm sick and I don't know what to do. And that's when I realized, after, I don't know, a decade of being a nutritionist, that women's bodies are different and we require a different keto. And once I adjusted keto to work for my body, because I'm a woman, that's when it all came together. 2015, I got my period back. It is now 2019. It has been years and I'm ovulating, menstruating, all the eightings, and my hormones are massively on the mend. So that's kind of how I found keto and why we're here right now.
That's awesome. And it's one of those things, because I have always advocated like a low carb paleo diet, right, with the patients in my practice, et cetera. And it was funny when I was going through my issues, some of the guys that just, huge advocates of holistic health and all of that would be like, there's no difference. I mean, men and women both fasted, all of this. And I was like, stop, let's look at it like Paleolithic era. Like, let's just look innately how our bodies are designed. Like, we are supposed to carry babies. Like, let's look at it with the hormones. So let's go through all of that with the hormonal system. You had just talked about ovulation. Let's dig into it all.
Okay. So the first thing that, if you're new to the whole hormone thing, there are a couple hormones, like key hormones, that we're probably going to focus on in today's talk, because there's like way too many to talk about all of them. But the main ones that I find women struggle with the most and are really influenced on the ketogenic diet, either positively or negatively, depending on how you practice, is first you have DHEA. And DHEA is a precursor to testosterone and estrogen. So if you don't have enough DHEA, you're not going to have enough testosterone and you're not going to have enough estrogen. DHEA is really good for sex drive, building muscle, any aging stuff. So if a woman comes to me and her skin is really, really loose and she's dealing with a lot of wrinkles like early on in her life, I would probably test for her DHEA. In my case, how I was saying, I just couldn't build muscle. Right. That was DHEA. Then we have progesterone. So progesterone is probably it's my favorite hormone, because in your cycle where your skin gets really clear and you just feel like you got it going on and like people are checking you out and your hair is beautiful, like those couple days where you just feel on top of the world, that is progesterone. Right. Like that is like your woman hormone. It raises as we are preparing for the implantation of a fertilized egg. You're going to get clear skin, regular periods. It encourages fat burning. It's an antidepressant. So that's why we feel like we got it all going on. And then we have estrogen. Now this is the bone strengthening hormone. So it's going to increase our sensitivity to insulin. If it's too high, it's going to cause us to gain a lot of weight. And then we have cortisol, and that is cortisol. I mean, there's a need for cortisol, but in today's day and age, we're either way, way, way too high because we abuse it, or way, way, way too low because we've abused it so much it just can't give anymore. And cortisol is our response to stress and low blood glucose concentration. So if we have really low blood glucose or we have a lot of stress, our cortisol will be released to break down muscle or other pieces to create more glucose in our body. So we think of cortisol as a stress hormone, but it does a lot more. And what I noticed when I wasn't eating enough, when I was forcing myself to fast, and fasting does increase our cortisol, I was breaking down muscle tissue to support the glucose that my body required. So that's another big one on keto. And then we have things like testosterone, which helps in the maintenance of tissues. It also helps with our bone mass, sex drive, blood cell production, digestive functioning, brain, mood. And then we get into thyroid. And usually someone's like, probably what we'll focus on is free T3 and TSH. These are like my two favorite ones. And usually you can tell a lot about a person from their TSH, which think of TSH. Okay, so you have your little baby thyroid. It's right here. It's I like to think of it like a little butterfly or a little kitten. It's very, very sensitive. So you got to speak really nicely to it. And it masters your metabolic rate, digestion rather, mood. It helps with your brain function. So this little baby thyroid over here in your little neck, it is told by your TSH, or rather your TSH tells your free T3 how much is required. So a person that will have an imbalanced TSH, whether it be too high, that could be like your TSH being like, guys, let's do this. Like, where are all the hormones at? Go, go, go. If it's too low, it can mean that free T3 is too high. So it's a good indication of what's going on. So those are kind of the hormones that are at play when we're talking about hormones in today's discussion. And then we have, if you want, I can go into how keto helps with hormones.
Absolutely, because this is the deal, is that they're all so intricately related, right? And I don't think people even understand that, because how often do we see, and I might be just jumping down a whole nother road here, but how many people are on their thyroid meds, right? But yet they're still overweight, they're still exhausted, but their thyroid numbers are coming back okay. And I know like where you're going with that. Within the medical community, their thyroid numbers are okay when we look at it differently, right? But thyroid and adrenals and ovaries, they're all interrelated. So, but definitely let's go in how keto is going to help it. But I know there's a lot of women out here that are struggling within the audience here, having thyroid issues, PCOS, all adrenal issues, right? Adrenal fatigue is a big word that's thrown around, but like you had even said, either it's exactly like no cortisol, or we've got so much cortisol because we're abusing our bodies so much. So let's get into all of that.
Yeah, like how much time do you have? Okay, so yes, I'm so happy that you mentioned that they're all interrelated, Lisa, because I like to think of the hormone landscape as like an umbrella. So you have all the little pieces of the umbrella coming out from this one like little tippy top at the very top of that umbrella. And without that little tippy top, the whole umbrella just falls apart. So think of that little tippy top. I got to figure out what that part of the umbrella is, because I use this analogy so much, but you guys know what I'm talking about. That little tippy top, that little nubbin, and it's so important, and I don't know the name of it. But think of that as being cholesterol. So cholesterol is the precursor for every hormone. And if we don't have enough cholesterol, we're not going to have enough hormone. And that's what drives me nuts when we talk about aging and women that are getting to their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and perhaps their cholesterol is a little quote unquote high. So their doctor puts them on a medication to lower their cholesterol. And they're going through maybe menopause where their adrenals are having to make all their sex hormones now. And not only are the adrenals super exhausted because children and full-time jobs and family and work and all the things. So now the adrenals are having to pump out more hormones, and our cholesterol is now lowered from medication. I mean, it's all interconnected. So I'm so happy that you mentioned that. And some of the key reasons why keto is so helpful for hormones, and why I ended up gravitating toward not only just a low carb diet, but a ketogenic diet, is because of the fat. Because when we eat more fat and the right types of fat, we are changing our cholesterol profile. Now, for me, that was raising up my total cholesterol. I had to raise it. When I would get tested, the doctors, like regular medical doctors, were like, Leanne, your cholesterol is too low. You need to raise this. So for me, it was increasing my cholesterol, increasing my HDL, lowering my LDL. My triglycerides have always been pretty goodish, so that didn't really change. But for somebody else, it could be lowering your overall cholesterol, lowering your triglycerides, increasing HDL, lowering LDL. All those different combinations help us to balance our hormones. Now, it's interesting. There was a study that was released in 2015, I want to say, where eating just 5% more fat than usual saw an increase in estrogen and androgen levels by 12% in women after menopause. So
wow.
isn't that crazy? Like
That's
just
huge.
increasing 5%, they saw that their androgen and estrogen levels increased by 12%. And I think so many of us are so afraid of hormones. We're being told like estrogen, no good, cancer, progesterone, no good. But we need them in the right levels and the right levels for us. So we know that keto can help balance our cholesterol. We know that keto can help us give us more fat because that's what it's all about. And also insulin, when we're regulating those blood sugar highs and lows and all those fluctuations, cortisol is released. And just as it is released when we're under stress. So our body can't really tell if it's, if we're under stress and acute stress, we're running away from a tiger, or we've just been in a car accident, or we've just gotten a threatening phone call, maybe your mother's in the hospital, and that jolt of stress that you get is a good thing. And when we're experiencing that jolt, our blood sugar is released so we can deal with that situation. But what a ketogenic diet does is allow us to deal with those acute stressors, but make it so that on a daily basis, when we are no longer going through those highs and lows, that we don't require as much cortisol. So we're helping balance not only our adrenals in that case, but just our overall blood sugar balance. And then, you mentioned PCOS as a concern for many women. And, studies show that PCOS, one of the main things is that blood sugar control, that we're just not controlling our blood sugar. Then we have things like our thyroid. So the really interesting thing about thyroid and that free T3 we were talking about earlier is that on a ketogenic diet, we see free T3 go down. And for a long time, people were like, oh, this could show that a ketogenic diet isn't healthy, especially for those that are really free T3 sensitive and people that need a lot of free T3. But when I went keto, I didn't have to care as much about my thyroid. I still do need to take medication, and I don't know if I'll ever get off of it, and that's okay. When we lower our free T3 requirement and we don't need as much of it, we actually lower a thing called sex hormone binding globulin. And this SHBG is, it is just not awesome stuff. Think of it like Velcro going through your body, sucking up all of the hormones before you get a chance to use them. So in the case of somebody like me who required more hormones because I wasn't having a period, having a lot of sex hormone binding globulin isn't a good thing because I need my hormones. And so they render them inactive. So by regulating out our requirement for thyroid and actually almost like down regulating our body's requirement for it allows our sex hormone binding globulin to lower so that the hormones we're making, we're actually using. And then we get into gut health, and with keto, if we're doing it, I don't want to say the right way, but like the right way for your body, which generally is eating more plants, focusing on healthy fats, we are helping our gut. And our gut also is involved in our ability to use up our proper hormones. So if the body is dumping hormones into the body to get rid of it, if we don't have a healthy gut, those hormones will actually be soaked back up into the body and be recycled again. So those are some tidbits on how it's all kind of interrelated. I mean, I could talk about this stuff forever. I get so excited.
Well, how about, I know, and bringing up gut health, I know this is like a whole nother can of worms, but you had talked about, or at least on your blog, about anxiety, right? And keto, and so much of this whole mind-body connection, not mind-body, but gut-brain connection. You can tell I'm a chiropractor, so I'm always like mind-body, but gut-brain connection, and how we can start seeing some improvements even with anybody that's having brain stuff, anxiety stuff as well.
Totally. And so a lot of women, so men are a totally different ballgame. Like they can do keto, low carb, high fat, like forever, and they're fine usually. That's a blanket statement, but it's just so much easier for them. It's like 20 grams of carbs forever, no big deal. But for women, I find if you start a ketogenic diet and you're really anxious, you may find that your anxiety actually worsens. And definitely chat with your doctor and stuff like that. But when somebody says like, my anxiety is getting worse, my immediate reaction is you need to start doing more of a cyclical approach to your ketogenic practice. So that could be incorporating things like apples, sweet potatoes, berries at dinner time, just to help with that. But generally speaking, the ketogenic diet does help with anxiety and just managing that, and just lowering the instances of a panic attack, or depending on the type of anxiety you have and the symptoms of that. But the relationship between the brain and the gut is pretty phenomenal. And if anyone's been eating keto for a while, they know that there's something magical that happens to their brain quite quickly. Like all of a sudden they're able to deal with emotions differently. They're more self-aware. And I would say like dealing with emotions differently, more self-aware. And by doing that, you're able to notice just, when you have dinner with your mother-in-law and she's like giving you a hard time, you get a stomach ache. And before you'd maybe not even notice, but with keto, you're so much more aware of your body. I think because you're not in the blood sugar highs and lows that you say, like what's going on here? And there really is, think of them as like sensors all through your gut, picking up on your brain activity. And when we're constantly stressed out and stuff, what do you think that does to our digestion?
Right.
So I think because the ketogenic diet can be super rich in glycine foods like bone broth and collagen and gelatin and those sorts of things, it's so much easier to focus on gut health. But it's also it's also very easy because the roots of keto, like you were saying, Lisa, at the beginning, when I first started doing keto back in 2014, there weren't a lot of people talking about this. It wasn't really a thing. All the people thought I was crazy for sharing this. And back then, and still now, the focus on quality foods wasn't that great. It was like, if it fits your macros, do it. But when we're thinking of gut health, it's really important that we think outside of just, does it fit your macros? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't found any studies that say that eating bacon, like a pound of bacon a day, is going to help your gut bacteria. Yeah, exactly.
The toxicity level of some of it, you know what I mean? I'm a huge advocate of organic foods, and people are like, why? I'm like, especially when you're eating such high fat of them, and knowing that that's where the toxicity is stored in us, in animals as well. So
exactly. And the hormones, our hormones are stored in our fat cells. That's why a lot of women, when they start eating keto and they're losing weight, might have an influx of hormone issues pop up. And that's just because, you're burning the fat that has the hormones, and that's got to go somewhere. And that's why a lot of us deal with acne, irregular periods, women that have been in menopause for a couple of years get their period back, just because, you're right. That's where the toxins and the hormones and everything are stored. So it's super important to do food that is high quality, just for overall health and wellness. And it might not fit your macros per se, but it fits your body's requirements to be healthy.
That's exactly it. Right. I think so many people look at low carb, high fat, and they start to try to figure out the macros on it. And that's where I'm just that huge advocate of saying, figure out what works best for your body, because what works best for you is going to be different for me, right? Because I did that one, the whole bit several years ago, and went a certain percentage of fat, and then I was like, okay, wait a minute, this isn't working right now. So we all just, and it changes. I mean, our hormones, like you had just said, they're changing every single, it's an up and down wave flex all the time. So we need to be able to do some cyclical keto, that type of thing too. So how about that? That's one of the things I know we wanted to touch on.
Yeah.
Really becoming in tune with our bodies as women, when we can look at some of the increase in carbohydrates, and not don't go crazy increasing carbs. When I say that, people think, 200 grams. I'm like, that's not what I'm talking about.
Pound the cherry turnovers. Where are the carbs?
Yeah, right. I'm like, no, but like you had said, perfect example would be like an apple or a sweet potato. That's not 200 grams of carbs unless you've got a whole big old, case of them. So
so it really depends how many carbs you eat based on how much activity you're doing. If I was still training the way I did before and hormones really important to me, I might have 200 grams of sweet potato apple goodness. It's very rare that I'll focus on non-paleo carbs, but I kind of leave that up to the individual. But let's talk first about our cycle. So this is for all women that are still experiencing a cycle, or for women that want to experience a cycle, but maybe you have amenorrhea, a lack of period, like what I did, and you're just trying to figure out, like, I think one of the major frustrations I had when I was trying to get my period back is figuring out what time of the month I was even on. Like, I'm sure my hormones are doing a little bit of something, but how do I decide? Well, the cool thing is you get to decide. And how I decided is I looked at the moon and I decided to start on a full moon. And that was then my first day of my cycle. So figure out how you want to sync yourself up to the moon and just follow along with what I'm about to share. So on day 1 to 5, so for women that are getting a period, this is the first day of your period to the 5th day of your period. Now this can move. Like, some women have a 3-day period, a 5-day period, an 8-day period. So anytime you're bleeding, or if you're not bleeding, 1 to 5 days from the full moon, you're eating high protein. That's usually where we excel the most. Eating more protein, eating a ketogenic diet that just has more protein. So add an extra burger, have some more chicken thighs, whatever you want to do to add protein, bone broth, gelatin, whatever. Then 2 days before your ovulation to 2 days, well, I want to say, 2 days before your ovulation, so the last day that you bleed, so maybe that's the 5th day, to 2 days before your ovulation, this is where you could even do no carb. Like, you could just no carb it. You don't really need carbs. I mean, if you do, that's great. That's probably beneficial. But if you're like a no carb type of person, this is the time to go hog wild with the fats and the proteins and be good. Then 2 days before your ovulation to 2 days after your ovulation. So we're thinking about like day 12 to 16 of your cycle. This is where the carbs come into play. So now this is such a short period, like it's only 4 days. So you don't have a lot of opportunity to eat all the carbs. So what I just say is, like, for 1 to 2 meals in that period, preferably at dinner time, take out some of the fat of your meal and add in some carbohydrates. And in days 12 to 16 of your cycle, so this is 2 days before ovulation and 2 days after ovulation, you need more glutathione. So hey, why don't we make sure we're choosing glutathione-rich foods in our carb ups? So that could be things like apples, grapefruit, tomatoes, oranges. Now, throughout the days when you're eating keto, glutathione-rich foods are going to be broccoli, avocado, parsley, garlic is on that list. So just focusing on glutathione-rich vegetables and fruits and things. And then you get into days 17 to 28, assuming that your cycle is 28 days. Now, all this kind of has to change depending on where you're at in your cycle, but basically 2 days after ovulation, you've done the carb up thing. And now you get into the magical time of really having to maybe do a bit more carb ups. So in the previous cycle, we maybe did like 1 or 2 throughout those 5 days, but now it could be once. Oh, there's like a little bug. Oh my goodness. It could be once a night. It could be once every night or once every week. I can leave it up to you and kind of see. The more hormone imbalance you have, I find the more carb ups you need, with the caveat of high testosterone. You might thrive on less carb ups. So just as a feeler out there. So that's where you're doing carb ups to your leisure until you get your period, and then you start the cycle all over again. So it basically goes high protein, no carb, glutathione rich foods, and then just carb ups when you feel like it. So there's really only like a week long period where you thrive on like hardcore keto.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. You made a comment at the very beginning, and I think this is going to be important for some of our listeners too, that just because somebody's getting a period doesn't mean they're ovulating.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay. So the best way to test whether or not you're ovulating, so ovulation usually, like for me, it comes about 13 days after the first day of my cycle. So I bleed for about 3 to 5 days. And then on about the 13th day, I ovulate. And the main way I know that I'm ovulating is that I test my temperature. I track my temperature just to see the temperature change. You can also track your cervical fluid, like your discharge, and kind of see where that's at. There's a really good book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility. I think that if you're super interested in this stuff, you should do that. I have not been able to find an app on the Android that is as good as the one on the iPhone. I actually kept my iPhone so that I could keep that one app, and it's called Life. It is awesome. And that just allows you to time it. Now, if you find like you're not ovulating, the number one reason you're not ovulating is because you do not have enough progesterone. And you probably don't have enough progesterone because you're stressed. So what happens, you might be thinking like, stress, what does that have to do with progesterone? What the heck? So it's something called the pregnenolone steal. So pregnenolone creates cortisol, and progesterone is over here. And so what can happen is pregnenolone can be converted over into cortisol, and pregnenolone can also be converted into progesterone. So we're basically stealing the pregnenolone from where progesterone is made to make more cortisol. And so cortisol is so required that the body says, okay, well, if we don't have enough cortisol, this is danger zone. If we don't have enough progesterone, we don't make babies. And that's probably a good thing because this lady's so stressed out. We don't want her to be making a baby. So, even if you don't want to make a baby, I think a lot of women think, well, I don't want to make a baby. Why does this even matter? It does matter. Like, we're talking so many symptoms that we can experience because of this. So a lot of women will have a period, but not ovulate. And ovulation is really where the magic is, because that's that amazing progesterone hormone that you just want to soak that up and enjoy it. And if you test yourself, there are tons of testing things that you can do. I recommend a company called Everlywell, just because you can do testing at home. So you just like prick your finger, put it on a piece of paper, send it in. It's like mind blowing that this exists. It's like Jetsons material. It's crazy. But it's really, really, really important to know where you're at with your progesterone, because that ovulation is like the Mac Daddy of everything that you want out of your body. And, things change. Once you hit perimenopause, your period will get a little bit wonky. You'll be missing some. And really it's kind of, you're staying the course with that and just continuing to eat keto and adjust. When you do have your cycle, they'll just be a lot longer of a cycle. And then when you can get into menopause, it's really, really, really important to support your adrenals and meditate. Please meditate. Mm-hmm. Try to fall in love with yoga or some form of yoga, Tai Chi, something, just to support those adrenals, because now they're making up for all the work of the rest of your body and making those hormones. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Adrenals are such a huge thing. Like, I live an hour outside of Detroit, right? And people are always like, well, how come you don't watch the news? I'm like, okay, here's the deal. If you have a cup of coffee in the morning and you turn on the news, like all this stuff going on, right? My body says, holy smokes, I'm running from a bear. And that's when the cortisol starts shifting. It's not just my body, it's everybody's body. And so we do, because especially, and I'm so glad you bring it up, because so often I don't hear people saying this, but as we go into menopause, when those ovaries start to slow down, that's when the adrenals pick up. And if we're already stressed out, that's not a cool thing. So we do have to take care of ourselves. And really, and one of the other things that, and I will start wrapping it up here, but you are such an advocate for people speaking kindly to themselves, right? And because even if we just spoke to other people the way that we speak to ourselves, we would have no friends. And the reality is, so many people just live that way, and just what is the turmoil that's happening within the body. So
yeah, it's so sad to see, and to just meet women, and to even, look back at my old journals and see what I thought about myself. It's just, it's horrible. You're right. No one would ever talk to anyone else like this, but we do. We talk to ourselves like this, and it's nothing you did wrong. You were learned this, and it was downloaded to you before you could say whether or not you wanted it or not. And it's up to us to kind of free ourselves of that. And I know that when I was in that space of, dealing with a bunch of hormone issues, also dealing with eating disorder stuff and my relationship with my body, and absolutely hating the fact that my thighs touched and all those things, and body love, bleh. but it's not about loving your body. I do not love my body all the time. And there's certain things that I don't love about it, but I accept it. I respect it. And that's the difference.
That's exactly it. What would you say, because this is one of the things that I'll see a lot with people where they're like, oh, this is a diet. And no, it's actually a lifestyle. But how can you change their mindset when they're like, I feel like, and you mean, I tell them I always are just like, just buck up and deal with it, right? Like, here's the reality. When they're like, oh, I don't want to have to cook a different meal for my kids. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And they're continuing to look at it as a diet rather than changing it, where for me, I'd say, well, cook the same meal for your children and teach them healthy options as well, right? So how do you help people with mindset that way to really focus in to not hate the fact that maybe their body's responding a certain way, like if there's an allergy to a food or whatever it is, that as they're trying to make healthier choices?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to fear. I think a lot of the things that we do or don't do is because we're scared of the outcome, really. And it can be really scary to step outside of something and do something else. And oftentimes when people say, well, I can't do that because, and I can't do that because, it's usually because they're afraid of something. So I work with tons of women on kind of breaking that down and working through their fear and understanding, like, why do you want to do this? Why are you wanting to do this? And oftentimes it comes to the point of, like, really huge health scares until people do stuff. Like, I've heard horrible things of women that had to get tumors, lose their eyesight, stop being able to walk until they finally said, maybe I should do something about this. And that is just so sad to me that our culture doesn't value how important it is to take care of our bodies, and we just outsource it to like a doctor and say, well, I'll just go to the doctor when I have an issue. It is your responsibility and birthright to take care of your body.
Yes.
So I think that belief system and just reminding yourself that it is just you. There's nobody else on this planet, in this universe, that will take care of you. So
nobody else can fix it for you. You have to fix it yourself.
And nobody actually cares. Like, let's be honest, like, nobody cares. Like, and I know that that's like kind of a harsh way of saying it, but like, nobody will care like you will care. So I think when people say, I don't want to make another meal for my family, don't make one meal.
Right. Like, as I always say, I have yet to see a 2-year-old drive themselves through McDonald's. Just saying, right?
Exactly.
Like, the choices are being made by somebody else.
It's an education thing, and getting your kids involved, getting your partner involved. If budgeting is an issue and there's a lot of stuff, there's so many resources out there on how to do this on a budget, and start with one fat. Choose coconut oil, cook with it, do everything with it. And when you go to Costco next, grab some avocado oil and just pick away at it. I think we make everything challenging, and it doesn't need to be. And I think it really comes down to fear, understanding that you are enough and you deserve and you have a birthright to take care of your body. And also having a supportive community. If you're surrounded by toxic people and environment, you're probably not going to make wise choices for yourself. And that's why, Lisa, like, starting off your day with the news and a coffee, like, that's not going to benefit you at all. Like, cut it out and find a community of supportive women to help you along this journey. And when you're around that in energy, it's just like, you want to do good. Like, you want to try new things and you want to talk about it. I think community is so important. And you were talking about that primal living and getting back to that. Like, I read a study that back in like, how was it, like the 1600s, people would meet a total of 30 people in their entire life. Like 30 people. Like, I see 30 people walking down the street on a Saturday. Like, so the sense of community is really lacking, because those 30 people that we would meet would be like our best buds back then, right? And we would know all of them, but now we don't. And I think it's really important that we find a sense of community. And that was really the driving force behind creating my Happy Keto Body program, so that I could create that community for women that needed that support.
So dig into that, and let's go through how they can find out more information about you and about your programs too.
Yeah.
So, find the books and everything online, but let's figure out how they can like network and work with you.
Yeah, of course. So you can find me at healthfulpursuit.com. That's kind of like my home of the internet and where you can find a lot of stuff. And then my love of all loves, my 12-week ketogenic video training program for women, Happy Keto Body. I launched it in April of 2018. I've taken through 2 amazing groups of women through this, almost, I think it's 1,800 students so far, just like teaching women how to be their best advocate, showing you how to eat a ketogenic diet, all the way through dealing with thyroid imbalance and autoimmune conditions, food sensitivities, gut healing. And I'm only one person, so we've brought in coaches to our program. I developed the program with the help of a naturopathic doctor, Dr. Nina Lewis-Larson, to bring in more of the science-based stuff. So I focus a lot on helping women through the beginning stages. And then if you want to go so deep as figuring out what your genes say about you and whether or not you have the ApoE4 gene, and we go really deep into that kind of sciencey stuff if you're interested in that. So you can find more at happyketobody.com. Registration opens January 10th to the 17th, and then we run our women through the program and then open it up again. And that's really just so we can focus and give them our undivided attention with coaching calls and forum chats and all the things to just help them along. And it's always been a dream of mine to just create a safe space for women to thrive with other women that have the same values and want to learn how to accept and respect their bodies from a place of a ketogenic diet, and really learning how we can use fats to thrive.
That's awesome. I love it. And you've created the community. That's wonderful. So thank you for all that you've done in helping getting true keto, like good, healthful keto out to the public. Because I've always laughed, like, had I told people 15 years ago to eat a low carb paleo plan, like I used to say, let's just decrease our carbohydrates, but they would have freaked out and thought it was, Atkins, right? Yeah. So I'm like, we're still talking about the same thing. It's just the different wording. So
yeah, it's so true.
Yep. So thank you so much for all of your time today. And it was so informative. And I know there's going to be a lot of women out here that are really going to have had some massive light bulbs go off throughout this whole presentation.
That's what I want. All the light bulbs going off. Thanks so much for having me, Lisa. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much.